Our focus today is on Christ consciousness. You could say awakening Christ consciousness or any other phraseology for it, but it really is about Christ consciousness. The reason I often use the phrase awakening is because it is about developing or awakening or bringing this forward. And again, bringing what forward? Christ consciousness. What is Christ consciousness? Was that having to do with exclusively Jesus or Christianity? Not at all, but I'll explain some of that as we go. This is a free intro, but it's not an advertisement. So I'm not the type that teaches where I say, well, now, thank you for being here. If you sign up and pay, here's what you'll learn, but not tell you anything. I like even standalone talks like this to be standalone talks. I would like, it's always been where I just say, let's go for it and share as much, learn as much as we can. I remember last time we did this, some of the folks that have taken the class workshop before and heard the lectures intro before, they were like going, I couldn't believe, first of all, you gave so much time, but also you covered so much territory in a free talk. They're like, you're supposed to keep some of that back, But no, I'm fine with that. So some of what I've covered in previous years of doing this, we'll cover again a bit. But it's always different as well. So the main theme, the main concepts that we're covering is, again, awakening, remembering this thing called Christ consciousness. Now, there's so many layers to that, so many angles and perspectives and facets to that. And I love it all. I love the topic. There's historic, there's present, there's consciousness, there's multidimensionality. There's so many pieces to it. It's one of the only conversations, topics, teachings, or whatever, even talks that I could do that covers so many categories of life. If you're talking about some topic, let's say light, aliens or pyramids, there's certain, you stay there and it can broaden a little bit, but it's a certain topic. Christ consciousness covers so many things. Basically, it covers everything. Because this thing called Christ consciousness is not an owned by Jesus kind of a thing. It's actually the name of God within us. You could also call it I am, presence, but Christ. So what we were taught linearly is that once upon a time, mankind has always been messed up, and at one point, God left heaven, put up a gone fishing sign, came to earth, became Jesus, and yet those same traditions are telling us it was God's one and only Son. So there's a bit of contradiction in all that, but God left heaven, and yet it was God's only begotten Son, Jesus, and basically he just skated through, meaning he was God embodied, or he was God's perfect child. When we were all created flawed, Jesus was created flawless, told us, basically, sucks to be you. Had you only been like me, a favorite, you would have had a better life. That's kind of what it looks like. Well, he's a model. A model of what? We were already created flawed according to these traditions. He was a model of what? If he was perfect, how could he model to the imperfect? We're supposed to become perfect. We're told we can't. Then you're told, but there might be a way out if only you somehow perfectly live by that model. According to which tradition, though? Because they can't even agree on what I'm supposed to do to be like Jesus. And even if I did a really great job, stellar job, and chose just the right group, because they each claim to be the only one that can do this for me, even if I landed the right group, only a certain number of those people are found acceptable. So, it's really, really just terrible odds. And it's terribly odd. But at the end of the day, that's the linear version of it. That Jesus, and his role and so on. But really what happened is that we believe we separated from God. And then we go on this journey, a journey basically that seems like a digression away and an evolution back. And, everything from Hinduism, Buddha himself, Jesus, whomever, they basically are agreeing that something seems to have gone wrong and we need to wake up or come back. One might talk about it more of sin needing forgiveness. Another might call it consciousness needing retrieved. But it's still generally the same thing. Off onto this fall, as it's called in the Bible, and then to this awakening, redemption. Some would say the redemption comes from one person that you pray to. Others would say it comes from your own evolution. Both of those can be true, by the way. But if there's a group that says your awakening comes from your own work and evolution, even if that's true, and it is, you can evolve, the evolutionary process can be sped up by our learning to accept the consciousness that you thought you needed to get to. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay? So it's really kind of a efficiency difference between the different groups. One that says you take thousands of lifetimes to get there. Another says you can do it in just a few lifetimes. Another can say it right now. You can just get it right now. It's all about the difference in efficiency. And I use that as a playful word to it, but is it really just efficiency in the sense of, well, I want to speed this up? Well, the efficiency means we get it sooner simply by choice. And if a person wants it to take longer, they can make it take longer. All right? But this consciousness, when we seemingly fall from the heavens, meaning from divine consciousness, into believing that we're separate, now fallen, flawed people, what we do is we come into the earth plane, and I'm going to be a little bit brief with this part, briefer than usual anyway, but we come into this universe. And in this universe, we end up gravitating towards particular star systems depending on what civilization or group we're part of. So we basically come in, we pick a star system, or we gravitated towards a star system, and we generally know of this star system that we're in. And when we come in, we're gravitating towards a particular planet, in this case, Earth. In other words, you don't only have one star system or evolutionary group in this universe, but we came to this one, and we come to Earth. And when we come to Earth, that's cutting the story short, because, some of us, the Pleiades, Arcturian star system, Sirian star system, this, all of these you can still go to. But we ended up on Earth. If you're watching this program, you're likely on Earth. Okay? Some of you may not wish to be here, or prefer to be here, or, realize it, but you are on Earth. So now we come to Earth, but where? You mean like when I was born 60 years ago, or whatever it happens to be? No. We came to Earth millions of years ago. And some of us came later than others, but it's not because you were created later. Everything was created when God said, "Let there be light." We are the light that was created. You think, with linear reading, it meant the sun. The star, the sun in the sky. Because we're thinking very self-centered, that only the sun has a solar system. In old days, people were thinking. It's all, so linear. So let there be light. If you read your Bible, the sun was created later. So then what did he mean by let there be light? That was our creation. We are the light of God, which is quite cool. Oh, yeah. And Jesus says it over and over. I am, the light. So he's identifying with I am is the light of God. The Christ in you is the light of God. Now, there's another phrase they have. Christ, Jesus, is the Son of God. But these are all plays on words. Because Jesus is the Son of God and he is the light of the world, he says. That's because the sun in the sky is the light of the world. So metaphorically, the Son of God is the light of God, capital L, and the sun in the sky is the light in our universe, right? In our world. So to say I am the Son of God, it's okay, for a while it looks like he's saying I and only I. He's talking about I am is the light. The Christ in me, which is also the Christ in you, is the light. So your light, your warmth, your comfort that the sun gives, it gives life. It comes from the Christ self. People are living in such darkness, they don't know how to create a better life. And you can't when you're living in darkness. So become the light. No, I'm just going to pray to Jesus, who is the light. That'll help for a while because it's better than nothing. But he's still going to steer you in the direction of become the Son of God. And it's interesting because he used then and now, even in A Course in Miracles, the singular term. You are the Son of God. Learn to see the Son of God in each other. Why singular? It's really tricky because even I will say the children. Because I'm being sort of lenient about this. Children would imply, and we're the children of God, true. But children technically is not fully accurate because children means separate ones. I don't mean the literal definition. I'm saying children means plural. There's several of us. When in fact, we're one, thinking that we're separate individuals. Okay, just as a footnote. So we are the light of God. And we come into this earth plane and we're feeling fallen and we're wondering, where do we go now? We were divine a minute ago, suddenly refracting like light through a prism, and we come into this universe. And where are we going to go? Well, long story short, we come to the earth plane when, for some of us, Lemuria. Others tinkered around a little longer before they came into the earth plane in Atlantis. And there's different eras. There's early Atlantean periods, later Atlantean periods, but certainly by that time, most everybody's incarnated. And that is one reason why some souls are very naturally Lemurian and some very naturally Atlantean. The ones that are far more the feminine right brain, that's a good way to put it. The Lemurians attracted a lot of right brain, being people that started gravitating towards being what we call right brain. One and creative and so on. Then some gravitated towards more like a left brain experience, Atlantis. All right? So just like you have these two civilizations, Lemuria, Atlantis, we have male, female. We have right brain, left brain. Not said exactly in the right order there, but something along those lines. Okay? So we've got this duality. We come into this universe and we have duality. Eve drawn from man, creating a replication or a depiction rather of what separation is like. So all of this has to come back to harmony. All of this has to come to healing. But what's amazing to me is people identify with male, female. I'm very Lemurian. I'm very Atlantean. I'm very Syrian. I'm very Pleiadian. I'm this and that and the other. But it's always back to the light. We're the light of God. Looking like, acting like all the others. But to me, what's profound is the light, Christ self. Even when you came in, it doesn't matter what civilization. When we came in, we never completely lost the true identity of who we are. But we did come in and look like we're forgetting. In the core of our being, there's the knowingness of who we are. But as we incarnate, there's more and more what seems to be a fading away of the memory of who we are. Lemuria was an amazing, beautiful, Edenic-like, like the Garden of Eden, just lush and beautiful, and there's trust and there's love. Because we still were very heavenly-like. But gradually mankind, and ancient mythologies and studies within Hinduism describe this concept of we kind of fall deeper and deeper, and then there's going to be a curve upwards. Where the curve upwards happened, when did it occur? Most would agree it's, let's say, 2,000 years ago. That was the time that it was going to have to start changing. So it was the perfect timing for a person to enter and say, I'm going to anchor in so much light, it's going to take the boomerang and turn it to an upwards, pattern. Now, it doesn't seem upwards sometimes. But what we accomplish in a short period of time is tremendous. You have to remember, even in just the last 100 years, which for some of us, it's in our lifetime, women are allowed to vote. Right? In our lifetime, for some, women are allowed. To you, it might seem, it seems so foreign. It didn't seem foreign to that one generation. Not too long ago. Equal rights, race-wise. This is all happening in just 100 years or so. Things that would have never been imagined for hundreds of years. So a lot of things are changing. What's not changing is the ego still exists and has no intention of this going well. So it's constantly trying to sabotage this movement forward. One way to do that is keep people living in the past. Keep them feeling, even though we have equal rights, keep bringing on the news the lack of equal rights to just make you feel like it never really happened. Don't think about how beautiful it is that women, it's almost like foreign to say, are equal. They were never supposed to be unequal. But that's the way it's phrased to give it historic kind of labeling. They are equal. They can vote and whatever. But the light in us never believed in any of this. It's the ego that took over. I call it hijacked the journey and took us off course. So the Christ in us comes to this place like, Lemuria and lived in an ancient civilization. But gradually we keep declining. So we decline from being, although on earth, very ethereal and very not distinct yet as genders. And then as time goes by, we're falling further and further and further. Why? Because every day that you wake up, the world is telling you through your senses that you're not in heaven. And as that happens, you start to increase your sense of guilt and fear, or fear and guilt. And as that happens, whatever you feel inside manifests outside. So as the children of God are falling, it's breeding more falling, because the outside matches the inside. So one thing happens, pain. Then pain manifests, to that pain, more pain. And we continue to decline in consciousness. Nevertheless, Christ, the light in us, is always there. The light is in us calling us home. In Lemuria, in Atlantis, when we started becoming more left-brain, more aggressive, more technological, and so on. The light is still there. How? There are still groups in every civilization. There's a group. There's at least a one person or a group within the bigger group of people that get it. And they want to be the, let's go home kind of voice. There's something not quite right. In Lemuria, the children of the sun, sometimes they called it, which is great wording. The children of the sun, not the children just from the sun, the children who are of the sun. We are the Son of God. But we're not seeing it as Christ exclusively anymore. We're starting to call it something else, of the sun. So we're falling, but we still remember to some degree. Atlantis, same thing. We're remembering. There's a group of us that are saying the children of light versus the children of darkness. Who, on earth, the majority is almost always the dark. On earth, throughout history, aggression, harm, control has all too often been the predominant voice. The light being the minority. And that's okay. It's not cool, it's not great, but it's okay because at the end of the day, we don't lose who we are. So what we have to do is change it today. Today, I am committed to this. Not focusing on how often the dark seems to be prevalent, but instead how much you want to nurture the light, starting with yourself. Now, it's not just, okay, well, that means everybody else is messed up, so I'm going to just step aside and do my own personal work. Yes, but also getting involved with groups that are part of the light work. And so we have this, Lemuria, we've got the same thing in Atlantis, children of light, children that are tuned into the light of God. Children, people that are like, let's be light workers. And we're moving in that direction. Then Atlantis has a calamity, and Lemuria sort of fades from history, and Atlantis has a calamity that takes us into what's like the Dark Ages times 100. This is long, but this is 12,000 years ago. And so we go into Dark Ages, but from there, the survivors of Atlantis and people throughout the world that still, survive, they every one of them becomes smaller groups and civilizations, whether it's Babylonian, Sumerian, etc. These groups, even then, those continents, those countries, those islands, those peninsulas, wherever, somewhere here and there, there's a group that are about the light. So part of the theme I'm sharing is that throughout history there have been light workers. They were there in Lemuria. It's not Lemuria versus Atlantis, no. In Lemuria there were light workers and there were some that opted not eventually. In Atlantis there were light workers and some not. And then every civilization after that. The ancient Egyptian, the ancient Sumerian, the Mayan, the Aztec, and so on. There's seems to be this pattern of the dark winning out, at least temporarily. You could have children of light, like the Mayans. And the Mayans and their capital, Chichen Itza, one of their major capitals. And in Chichen Itza, one of the interpretations of Chichen Itza is the children of Isa. And Isa is the name even in India for Jesus. Isa, Jesus. So the Mayans somehow were remembering, passed down word, word of mouth, that there was this master that came to us once. This master. And he taught us. And throughout the North, Central, South American, continents and civilizations, there are all these stories passed down about this, even Jesus having come to these regions and taught. There was this lighter skinned man. He didn't belong amongst us. And he had a reddish golden like hair. He was tall and slender. He wore this white seamless robe. It was the look he chose to appear to them, obviously, but he had these wounds on his wrists or hands and on his feet. These were all ways that he could, it's not because he actually ethereally still has these wounds, but it's the way that he could appear and they would remember that so that people would know if they heard the legend, it was him, undeniably him. So you have people that are saying 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,700 years ago or whatever, there's these stories about him having visited here even after his crucifixion and all. He appeared here. That doesn't mean he escaped the crucifixion and rode a boat over here. He appeared to people. He was able to come to everybody and be, manifest. So this, like the Mayans, they have stories and legends about his visiting, his coming here. But the Mayans were light workers. They believed in peace. They would work the fields and bring sacrifices, as it's called to us, but they would bring offerings to the altar of the field. Here's a portion of the flowers we picked today. Here's a portion of the grains we picked today. Thank you, God, called tithing. There were other civilizations, again, the Mayans outnumbered, that eventually took them over, like the Toltecs and the Aztecs. The difference is, usually the children of darkness, there's different ways to know one group from the other, their behaviors, of course, but the children of darkness, even if it's overseas in the Middle East, almost always involve themselves in human sacrifice. The Mayans are bringing offerings of the field. The Aztecs and the Toltecs too, we're doing human sacrifice. Because one is about life and one's about death. One's about control, fear and control. The other one, expansion. So the Mayans are all about this. They get taken over and they're sort of forced into submission. And so that's why historically, the historians can say, yeah, the Mayans did sacrifice. They didn't. They eventually were forced into it. But that's also why the Mayans disappeared from history. Well, we don't know. They must have died off or these different stories. No, they got out of Dodge. They saw what was coming and they left. Where did they go? To North America and up through the Mississippi Valley and became what's called the Mound Builders. There's answers to all these things. There's history and there's answers. It's not as much a mystery. It's only a mystery to minds that don't want to know the truth. So there are these civilizations. There's always these teachers of light. Akhenaten in Egypt. The Egyptians are doing sacrifices to the gods. Akhenaten says there's only one God. And they said, we don't like you because the priests are making money and fame and power off of many gods that they're in touch with, they claim. Akhenaten says, I believe in one God. And there's reasons why he said that and he realized it, but they ended up assassinating him and his descendant, which is King Tut. They're assassinated because there's this risk of one God that you commune with yourself rather than power to the priests. And that still happens today, even in new thought groups, fundamental religions, and so on. The light workers don't belong to any particular one group. There are light workers in Rosicrucians, and there are some that are not very light connected. There is, secret societies that were connected to light and some that turned it into darkness. It's up to us to recognize Christ consciousness is something I am, and I choose to anchor where I am. I also can do that on my own, walking the world. But I can also do it at times with groups. So in history, the Mayans, they were light workers, but they got turned. The Knights Templar, they were light workers, and they got turned. It keeps happening. Don't focus on it getting turned, but focus on a couple things. One, that it existed. The Christ has always been trying to peek through the dark clouds. Secondly, that manifested as light workers in Lemuria, Atlantis, Sumeria, Mayan, and then all the way down to the Essenes, some of the Gnostic groups in the Middle East, the Essenes, and then eventually Christ is born through the Essenes. Then comes what we call the early Christians. Then come the Cathars. Then come the Knights Templar. Actually, early Christians and then the Arthurian Knights, Cathars, Knights Templar, and then other groups. In the Dark Ages, it became people that were writing poems and songs because they could conceal truth teachings in songs and not be persecuted. The Dark Ages. Dark for several reasons. Yeah. And, you're persecuting light. But those individuals that went quiet, they hid the secret teachings. So you have to just kind of go along with this strong push for Catholicism. But instead, these guys are like, no, light work, light work, light work. And it starts manifesting as what's called secret societies. Secret because you'll be persecuted, if you overtly have this concept of connecting with God. You can't connect with God. You have to go to the church and pay them. So this concept then in the Dark Ages, they say it was in the trades, in the building trades, and in the arts. That's where spirituality went in the Dark Ages. It had to go and hide. Almost immediately, because during Jesus he's put to death. Then after Jesus you have what? The early Christians. They're all being put to death and persecuted. So it kind of goes into hiding at that time. And it has to stay into hiding until the Renaissance. But even the Renaissance, secret teachings or light teachings have to be concealed. So in the Dark Ages you have secret societies, but the building trades, that's why you have your secret handshakes within Masonry, but it was also with the Knights Templar and so on. You had to keep that kind of concealed to avoid persecution. But the building trades also did it. And the way the building trades would do it is all in the geometry of all their buildings. The geometry would conceal a message that God is the architect, and even when we build a building, it's all done within sacred geometry that's telling you something if you know how to unlock that. If you know how to unlock every building. So even if you take churches that were built traditional, now the shapes of everything, they just take off into any form of architecture. But traditionally, the buildings were built with a sacred geometry. And you go back to churches of that time. It's kind of funny. The church would pay the builders to build a church. The builders had a bit of a laugh about that. Because the builders are like, that's fine. You give us money. Because we get to do our sacred teachings while we build. And you guys are too ignorant to know it. We're slipping in higher teachings into the buildings you're paying us to build, even though you would persecute us if you knew what we were doing. So it's pretty clever. And if you look at the traditional model of a church, it is front door, it's elongated all the way up with the altar up at the end, right? And usually there's two side parts. Even churches I remember as a kid, two side parts. Take it, stand it up, and it's the shape of a cross. But it's also the shape of you. You walk in the doors, which would be like you walking in through your root chakra and moving upward higher in consciousness. Where are we trying to go ultimately? How is this not Kundalini? You walk upwards, 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 and where's the altar? Here. This is where there's an altar. And don't forget, there's steps here, usually, steps here. You're not allowed to go up those steps, only the priest. But what's great is the guys building this are saying, God is already there. And it's you. You are the cross. So you are journeying into your being through your root chakra, up in higher and higher and higher consciousness where you will find God. And the reason they built it like this and had choir used to traditionally be up in the loft, hidden away. So it was replicating that you're in heaven when you're in your higher consciousness. You're in heaven and you hear the choir. You weren't even supposed to see them originally. But the sounds, as I get closer to the altar, God, heaven, I hear the angels sing. It's all beautiful. It's all beautiful if you think about it. And what it's replicating. This is me. Not, I'm going to church, I'm lowly, I'll stay back here towards the root chakra, lower self. Not lower because it's bad, but lower self by definition, by title. And we look at the priest, only they're allowed to be up on the altar. And we realize instead, at some point when you choose to know who you really are, you see it differently. I am this thing. This is us. This is me, every one of us. And heaven and the choir and all of that occurs up there, that's in every one of us. And this is also replicating a bit of Solomon's temple. So it's not even just like, say, Catholic churches. Solomon's temple had the same kinds of symbolism. You had to do bathing and different fire rituals in Solomon's temple to approach the altar. And you couldn't even go in beyond the veil where the altar or the Ark of the Covenant was. Because there was a veil there. It's great symbolism. No one is allowed to actually enter God. At best, you'll have a representative who would be seemingly evolved enough to deserve to be in there, and that would not be you. Then, at the moment of Jesus' death, they say in the Bible, the veil, the curtain in the temple, where Solomon's temple, was actually torn open. Now, did it literally get torn open? Okay, yes or no, doesn't matter. It's great, because either way, more importantly, even if they were just saying that metaphorically, why did that happen and what did it mean? The veil between you and God ended at that moment. That's very important. Why? Because Jesus was saying, I'm going to walk the walk. I'm going to enter God consciousness, remembrance called I am in Christ consciousness. And then I'm going to invite all of you to join me. Not, and I'm going to be a priest and you can all pay me to tell you about this. I'm this presence and I'm in you, so you too can now join into this consciousness. That's the deep, beautiful message behind Jesus is my Savior. It's because he's one of us who walked the experience on earth, woke up to who he is, and then in awakening chose to say no more separation. And that's why if you believe in me, you'll be saved. But he's not talking about historic Jesus. He's talking about if you believe in the consciousness that I have found and remembered, you too will get here. Now it's not sounding too unlike Buddha or anyone else that's attained that remembrance, mythological characters or real. So you have this light showing up throughout history, Knights, Templars, but you watch this because if you find yourself intrigued by the Mayans or the Knights Templar or Arthurian Knights or early Christians or whatever it happens to be, if you sit with this for a moment, you'll start recognizing, okay, I'm not just somebody who got on the path 3 years ago. If these things are sounding familiar, maybe I've done this. If I'm an artist of today and I weave spirituality and arts of today, I wonder if in the Renaissance, or even in the Dark Ages, I wonder if I was one of the artisans. Was I a bard? One of the minstrels? Because that's what they were all about. Singing songs and legends about this person who was victorious over this dragon. It's all mystery teachings. The dragon, how is that not the Kundalini rising and awakening certain tests inside of you. And you tame the dragon, meaning, instead of your tests of life controlling you, you know how to be the victor, the hero or heroine. So they're concealing all these great teachings in arts, paintings, geometry, Da Vinci. Da Vinci's downloading Christ awareness into the art. Just take any painting of it, the Last Supper. He paints the Last Supper, and now they look at the Last Supper and they make a musical bar across the Last Supper. And there's points of reference where a guy's hand is, and then an elbow, and this, and they put notes, dots on these key points in the painting. And then they start creating, they realize, and this is music. And you can actually play the music of the Last Supper. That's how tuned in he was. He didn't say, I got this song in my head. I think I'm going to paint a painting to replicate the song. Then the painting came first and it coincidentally had. It's not coincidental, it's a consciousness. As soon as he received the image of the painting, it was already set up. He didn't have to think to make it, like a cool thing he was pulling off. That's how tuned in a person can be. As I said this happened at the same time. As I painted that happened. That's really when you're in tune and several things are happening in layers. And that also is true for everything we do. We already know everything, but we don't act like it. You know when you're going to die. You know when something's going to change in your life. We're completely knowing, but humans love to live in ignorance because it makes them then victims. And then there's no excuse, as to what's happening in their life is not their fault. When you take the place of, if I'm the Christ, then why in the heck did I marry that one? Why did I have that happen? Why did I lose that? Why did I get sick? It doesn't make sense. And you're right, it doesn't. Unless you can say I'm the Christ, and there are parts of me that like to forget that at times. When I forget, then that's when those things manifest or come to me. So Christ has been here all along. It didn't just show up 2,000 years ago. Christ was there as light work in Lemuria, in Atlantis, and in every time since. But it has manifested in groups. Am I feeling familiar to those groups? Then this is not my first time around. It's not my first rodeo. There's a resonance. There's a familiar. That's cool. And then it also adds for me to go, wow, not only is there a resonance, but this friend of mine felt a resonance with some of those as well. And this spiritual teacher I listened to, they're into that. And then this book I read, you start feeling more familiar. And to me, that's important because it's assembling your memory of having done and been light work. It's really cool because it gives you more, almost like a healthy history. Kind of like a spiritual version of finding out that you're an heir to some billionaire family. Wow, me? Royalty and so on? It's like that, but a spiritual version. I can see where I've connected to this several times in my life. Very cool. I can also then start owning it more in this life. That's even better. And I'm also grateful that so many of you have walked with me. This is what we would be saying energetically on this path of awakening. And even after the time of Jesus, like I said, Arthurian Knights and Cathars, the Cathars are a group of people that were just devout, to God, to Christ. And then the Knights Templar, who had it together and all that, but also got a bit corrupted, and so on and so on. But also secret societies like the Rosicrucians, they had light work that they were, involved in. So there's groups throughout history, ancient history, not so ancient, and even modern times. Just looking at the Renaissance, during the Renaissance and during this period of light work going from underground to becoming a little more overt, a little bit. But there's still these things called secret societies. And some of them start moving with the culture, with civilization. So when migrations take place from Europe over to America, the light work is being planted here. And some of the people that did that were, like the Rosicrucians and the Knights Templar. They planted seeds of light in America, without getting into all the details. You can probably just go watch this same kind of a topic, couple hours worth in a talk a year ago. Planting seeds of light. Now, what happens to those seeds? They start growing. We have this Puritan, highly judgmental religious thing. We're coming over here for religious freedom so that we could burn people at the stake. That doesn't make any sense. But there's a bit of that going on. Puritanism, extreme versions. But there's still mysticism, because there's still Knights Templar are trying to, and the Knights Templar knew you can't do this too overtly, because they were, back in history, they were gathered and put to the stake too. They were murdered for being, into non-conventional spiritual beliefs. So they knew it's better to lay low. And so that's what they did. And they became Masons, not just the Elks Lodge kind of Masons, but the ones that really did a lot of their quiet work and maneuvering, to the point that even politically. See, the Rosicrucians hang back, they just meet and do like spiritual work. The Masons said, we're going to take that to a political level. And they became the forefathers of our country, many of which were Freemasons. But they also believed in the true masonry, like the sacred geometry. And so they were really, really blessed. They were really enlightened beings in many respects. Which is a good metaphor for us, a good teaching for us, that when you own your light, the world isn't always wanting that. So how are you going to bring that light? How are you going to be that presence today? And these guys said, even if at the threat of death for treason, we're going to do it. So really, high kudos to them. And all the others, the Cathars, they were put to death. The Templars, there's a lot of that going on. But now we get to 1700s and we're fighting for this freedom here. The Knights Templar were behind that. The Knights Templar are the ones who stirred up the Boston Tea Party. They created this rebellion, this fight, so that they could break free of the Queen. Why? Because England and France are the ones that were persecuting them for hundreds of years. And they thought, this is great. We're going to get them back. So the Knights Templar became pirates. That's where that tradition of pirates came from, the skull and crossbones on the flags. The skull and the crossbones is a symbol of secret knowledge. So the pirates were really rebellious Knights Templar who were out to get the Queen, the King back, royalty back, and the Pope. No better way than to keep stealing their money on the high seas. So that's a bit of what happened there. Piracy wasn't always like a dark, kind of gross, gruesome thing. There was a code of ethics when they were Knights Templar. And we came to this country and planted seeds during the Renaissance. Kind of beautiful if you think about it. Even the Columbus, and none of this happened the way we were told. Columbus's family, he married into the Sinclair family. The Sinclair family were Knights Templar who were out in Rosslyn Chapel and hiding treasures of Solomon's treasure out in Rosslyn Chapel until they eventually came to the Americas and hid it in Oak Island for a while. So these guys were plugged in, and Columbus was part of that. We hear of Columbus, he was just kind of an ignorant commoner, and yet had a dream of going off to America to look for. It's because he was shown maps from these guys, the Sinclairs, that already knew America was there because they were already there 50 years, 100 years before, Columbus. So things were not quite the way we were taught. Jesus was a carpenter. Not really. But when your father's a carpenter in those days, that's what you're assumed and presumed to be. He never even hung around. He's probably told you're going to be a carpenter, that's why he left. But, I don't want to work that hard. So he traveled and taught. He was a spiritual teacher, not a carpenter. To say he was ever there with his father as a child, learning it, sure. But in the mystery schools, they say the word carpenter was builder. They didn't say carpenter. They say he was a builder. A builder meant what? Back to the sacred geometry of building anything. We know he had his hands in on things. In ancient Britain, there are stories and songs from 2,000 years ago, and even more and more and more current to today, songs that miners sing, chants that they sing about Jesus having come there in their tin mines and taught them songs because he taught them how to extract tin from the earth in an easier way than they were. Now you could say it's simple, it's weird, it's fable. To them, it's absolute history, and I agree. So in the Americas, planting seeds, coming over planting seeds, it might start as secret societies, guys, but within 100 years, it also starts to become this thing that's becoming quite fashionable in Europe called mediumship. Mediumship, where you're channeling, is the word today. So mediums were channeling mostly discarnate beings. That's the way they did it or thought of it. Channeling isn't just about discarnate beings. Channeling becomes channeling information, not just dead people, but information. Then it evolves to where you are becoming a channel of God, not just of information or dead people, really becoming a channel of God. And then even more evolved than that is becoming the living example of what you channeled. Got that? So that, even that's an evolution. So mediumship was starting to become fashionable. 1700s, 1600s, it existed before. Even King Solomon was involved in that sort of thing. But it evolved and becomes 1800s fashionable, mediumship. Into the early 1900s. But in the 1800s, mediumship is growing. When we come over to this country and it's growing and growing, civilization here, so does spirituality. And so, in the 1800s, mediumship starts to come over here through people such as Madame Blavatsky, who was popular, Rudolf Steiner, who was popular in Europe. And that's when that started coming over here even more. So now we have mediumship growing here. Even though it was there in Salem, as we know, mediumship was now growing. But it's not the mediumship I'm talking about that's Christ-centered. I'm saying mediumship as an art, as an act, as a skill. That's growing. And then what happens is some people start receiving guidance. And it's not labeled mediumship, but it's guidance. And some of them become founders of New Thought churches, Science of Mind and Unity. But understand, this is the light that started in Lemuria, continued to the Essenes who birthed Jesus, continued through the early Christians, on and on and on. Got that? Cathars and so on, to the people coming over here like Rosicrucians, and then even people that are saying, I'm just feeling Jesus is talking to me, and he's telling me to, but Jesus is what we're calling it now, but it was Christ all along. And so these people are saying, I'm feeling Jesus, hearing Jesus, and we're going to start New Thought, positive version of spirituality. And that's where that gets birthed. So in a sense, there's two kinds of spirituality that two forms Christ is primarily refracting into in America. Other countries too, but we're talking here now. And 1800s. One, the New Thought. The other, Metaphysics. New Thought is more about the Bible and positive thinking. Metaphysics is your astrology and all those other cosmic-like things. Technically, they're all the same. But New Thought didn't want to have any much of association with the other because they kind of went, there's some weirdness there and we don't want to be associated. So that's why to this day, Unity will say, we do not support channeling. We don't want to be confused with metaphysical people and channels, except their founder was a channel. So it's kind of funny if you think about it. But so spirituality in this country, Christ consciousness in this country primarily took two forms. Your New Thought groups and metaphysics. The father of the New Thought groups, there's women and men involved, including like Ernest Holmes and Charles Fillmore and his wife as well, the Fillmores. So they're in the New Thought. But in metaphysics, Edgar Cayce. All of the ones I just named are channels. Cayce would still do the trance. That's why he's more metaphysics. The others wouldn't do a trance. They would just feel inspired. Still channeling, but that's the way they did it. It doesn't matter if you like one, the other, or both. What I'm saying to you is Christ is always resurgent. There's a resurgence. Christ is always trying to show up in our lives. In you and in me, but also as a thing on earth. It can't die. It can't be crucified, go away, or anything like that. So where is it and how am I involved in it? Well, did you feel a calling to unity somewhere? Did you feel a calling to Cayce's work, Michael Mirdad, or whatever it is? Then you're into Christ consciousness. Some people are going to say, no, I don't like that term Christ. It's too Christian. I don't like it. That's fine. You might want to look at what stake you were burned at that made you have, made you had triggers with that name, and you might want to work on that. Because if you shame the name of Christ, then you're shaming the concept of it, and then you're shaming your own I am presence. Come back to Christ. See, not come back to Jesus, come back to Christ and get what that means. Come back to, you know what? Christ has been fighting for me all along. It called to me in Lemuria. It called, and it was persecuted. And Akhenaten, it was put to death. And so on and so on. Like, wow, I really owe it to Christ consciousness to surrender and step into it. It's been calling me for so long and has suffered a lot for that. No more, not at least in my life. So I'm going to step back in and find my colleagues. And it's not that you have to call it that, name it Christ, but it's your tribe. There can't be a higher tribe. If you say, yeah, I'm looking for my tribe, you just want other what? Just people to drink with. That's not the highest tribe you can find. I'm glad you found somebody you could relate to. Your family might have been a tribe for you of sorts, your genetic family. It might be your drinking buddies. It might be your school friends. My tribe, whatever that is. And mutual drummers. We go up on the hill and do drumming and it feels like it's my tribe. With fellow hippies, whatever it is, you could call it your tribe. I'm saying there's no higher tribe than the tribe of remembrance, the tribe of Christ consciousness. That's the highest tribe. So try and allow yourself to wear that, to zip that up and wear that a bit and say, really anything else is settling. And if I settle, that's okay. Don't shame myself, but anything else is settling. I really want to be amongst others who are on the path of Christ consciousness. So that's what I'm going to commit to. I also can see where I've done that before. That feels kind of cool. That feels good. It feels familiar. Now it's not even as far a journey for me to find that. I've already done this. Quite proud of that. Did I ever slip? Possibly and likely. And then what? Bounce back. So if ever you had an interest in Edgar Cayce's work, it's likely because Christ consciousness is common to you. Course in Miracles. If you like it, it's probably because Christ consciousness is familiar to you. If you were into sacred, geometries, or if you were into secret civilizations, secret societies, not all of them, but certain ones like Rosicrucians, they were founded in Christ consciousness. So that's how you'll know is what are they about? Oh, I was just into Edgar Cayce. Guys, you were never just into Edgar Cayce. Cayce's all about Christ consciousness. Oh, I really admired him. He's quite the psychic, coming from your intellectual self. Really like Cayce. Yeah, he's a good psychic. No. That dude was committed to Christ consciousness. His work was sanctified to Christ consciousness. You didn't accidentally feel a calling to attend a unity church somewhere. You can't deny their roots, which is Christ consciousness. Okay? So it's like you can basically give thanks to yourself for pulling that off, for having chosen something that's related to Christ, because it's also your own higher self, remembering you've likely done that before. If others, push away from it, run from it, that's okay. Let them do their thing. But find your own way back into that consciousness. Now, that said, clearly, even if a person's watching me or listening to my teaching, it's the same thing. It's Christy stuff. It's all about, that old Christy feeling has me in its spell. It's all about that old Christy feeling. And it's back and it's familiar to me and it's quite cool. I just really identify, I being any of us, I just really identify with that. You may not know what to call it. You might even get shamed if you call it something about Christ consciousness. Do what's appropriate for you to keep your sanity and to not seem too pushy to others, of course. But just recognize it's this Christ thing. I like Yogananda. I'm not into this Christ thing. You're wrong. Yogananda said the highest thing you can attain is Christ consciousness. Oh, he did? Yes, he did. What else are you into? I really like Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner said the highest consciousness you can attain is Christ consciousness. I never heard that. I don't care if you heard it or not. That's what he said. You see? Things you think you're interested in seem tangential. Watch, because more of them than you imagine are focused on Christ. Doesn't matter. They might use different terminology, and often they don't. I mean, Yogananda blatantly used the term Christ. So did Steiner. And then Edgar Cayce. Then you have A Course in Miracles. Oh, I really love the Course. That's a textbook of Christ consciousness. Yeah. Well, it's not so much the Course. I really like, and then you name another one. Here's the trick. Even if you think I'm independent of Christ consciousness, because you got some spiritual rebellion going on, and what I like is something else, almost certainly 90-something% of the time, if you name something you're into, which is not related to Christ, what I'll tell you is whoever wrote it or taught it was into Christ. You can't escape it. If you have a teacher or teaching you're into, the odds are 90%, even if it's not Edgar Cayce, overtly, blatantly Cayce, if you like any particular teacher or teaching on this planet right now, I'm not talking about ancient religions, I'm talking about just teachers of today. The odds are 90-something% that they have at least read, studied, or whatever, Edgar Cayce. Okay? There was a saying back in the old days, the 50s and even older, but there was a guy, his name was Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was so wealthy, people don't realize it because in today's standards it wouldn't look as much. He was so wealthy, he was involved in everything, and nobody knows that. Because anything you did, he had a hand in on it. If you bought a shirt, if he didn't make the shirt, he owned the machines that made the shirt. If he didn't own the machines that made the shirt, he owned the machines that made the buttons for the shirt or the thread that made the shirt. He was in on everything and people didn't realize it. That's how kind of he was, in his work. And in a sense, that's like Cayce. You can't really escape the work of Edgar Cayce. You might not be an overt, blatant student of, I read his books and so on. You may not. But he's affected that many things. If not you directly, your teachers. What does that mean? Well, not Edgar. It's that he was devoted to Christ. So you have found Christ in ways that you don't even know. Again, I'm into Yogananda. That's Christ in his own way. Okay? If not directly, indirectly. So it's kind of nice. We are all being called back in that direction. When I came to Unity of Sedona, when I came to Sedona and work here at Unity of Sedona, it was interesting because I thought, wow, this town, it's odd in many ways. These people they're into anything. They love fads and stimulus, the spiritual community. So it's like, okay, these people, they like worship Bigfoot. They're into UFOs. Christ is not an easy word to use in this town. But I said, but I'm here, and there's at least this group that wants me to teach this. So I never mingled out there too much. I just came here, did my work here. But what my heart really was warmed by was people started coming out of the woodwork in Sedona to this place that aren't into unity, that aren't blatantly into Christ or whatever. They started attending, and then they started describing why. They would, testimonials after services, they'd raise their hand, and they would say, this is what I commonly heard several years ago. They would say, somehow you're bringing God back into our lives. Christ, sometimes they would say, or God. And I would say, well, what do you mean? How was God out of your lives? God is made into a traditional, old-fashioned word in this town, they would say. You're making it safe. You're talking about God like it's a valid, righteous, okay experience instead of steer clear. That's amazing. Because even I was thinking, I don't know how these people are going to, I'm going to do this God thing, and they're not into it. And they admitted, yeah, we weren't. But it's almost like they were saying peer pressured out of thinking about talking about God. You're making God an okay concept again. Well, as a teacher, man, it's like, wow, that's amazing. And I teach it like this, but what we're also being asked to do is, of course, be that presence. Make people see that there's something about you that has a continence, a light. There's a light about you. the way you speak, the way you handle crisis, the way you bridge conversations, or whatever it happens to be. And all of this is not ending in the way people think. Christians, fundamental Christians, would think that, one day the world is going to blow up. Jesus is going to come in and he's just so ticked off, he's sending everybody to hell. Other people are thinking we're all evolving. And if you're evolving at the rate humanity's going, this is still going to be many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to complete, which is a long time and a lot of lifetimes. So it's not really going the direction people have pinned it to be going. What's happening is underneath all the various names of God and not so God kinds of things on this planet, there still is this divine plan. God is saying, I am always calling my children home, and they're hearing it like this and they're hearing it like that. Some hear the call, step in, well, that's light workers like us, and some hear the call and they run because they're too afraid of being who they really are, for various reasons I talk about every Sunday. So this is all going to come to a head soon. Christ consciousness is who we are, so it's inevitable to remember that. You can't run forever. But whether it's Aztec, Mayan, Egyptian, all kinds of sources, channeling, that keep telling us now is the pivotal time. It's not like it's kind of, and then 500 years later we'll say it again. This is the pivotal time. In the measurements of, because it was made with sacred geometry, the Great Pyramid, there's no drawings like in a movie, how sometimes they go into a cave and they find the prophecy, carved into the walls. There'll be a person who helps save the village. The Great Pyramid, there's no such thing. It's all in measurements. So when you go in the Great Pyramid, every inch that you measure is a number of years in history. So they can measure. They found already, they had this one, brilliance. They had this solution, math solution. They figured out you get to this one part and it was the Depression. They measure again, the First World War, the Second World War. This is all measured. Different parts of doorways in the pyramid that you go through were the measurements of time, looking back historically. Now, and there's also other chambers buried beneath the pyramid they haven't found yet. Hall of Records and all that are down there. But in the Great Pyramid, you're moving through with measurements. Now, they figured it out. They go, that can't be wrong. It's exactly the number of years, the Great Depression, the First World War, Second World War, and so on. So they got it all measured. So they finally get to the King's Chamber. That seems to be the last chamber. So when you get to the King's Chamber, we're in our time. And they say, okay, now we get to the King's Chamber. When you measure from the doorway of the King's Chamber to the back of the King's Chamber, time would end, theoretically. They then ask Edgar Cayce, these geniuses, we measured, and according to our measurements, the world should end around 1970. You get the measurement, the Great Pyramid ends around 1970. And what do we find? In the back of the King's Chamber, just an empty sarcophagus. And so they said, well, what's that? Was there somebody buried? Who was buried in there? Cayce said, nobody, because it symbolizes there will soon be no more death. And the 70s, well, I don't know, what happened in the 70s that was so... No, Cayce said, you have to measure now going up the wall.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah. So you measure to the end of the King's Chamber, then you have to measure upwards. Yeah. But he also says, and because they said, are our measurements correct? He said yes and no. He says because time is speeding up. So what looks like a long distance further is going to be a shorter distance.
Like 10 years.
So he says the measurement ends in the early 2000s, like within a generation of our time now. The King's Chamber, the Mayans, the Aztecs, this and Nostradamus, and all these people are talking about the time we live in. Well, what's going to happen? Oh, well, it'll just be really great. It'll be like there will be no more poverty and we'll have a UFO in every garage, like some politician promising people great things. No. It's going to be a movement into our remembering who we are. This isn't about a better politic on the planet. This isn't about a better economy. It's not a better ecological kind of circumstance. This is consciousness. Now, the good news and bad news. The good news is we're going somewhere into our awakening. And it's happening very pivotally in our lifetime. However, the bad news is, humans will wake up one of two ways, the easy way or the hard way, and they usually choose the hard way. So I could tell you, it's great. And, the harmonic convergence and the 11-11 alignment and the 2012 thing and the 2030, and on and on. This is true. It's all happening. It all particularly started changing around 1960. Different people being born to come in to make pivotal changes. It doesn't mean you weren't part of it if you were born in 1950. In fact, you were still here when it shifted, late 50s, Cayce says. So all these things are shifting and we're part of it. So you ready? We're all going to, well, no, we still have people, just watch reality TV and you'll know we're screwed up. This is not looking good. The prognosis isn't looking good. So how do we go into Christ consciousness in our lifetime and or the next generation with things looking the way they look? It doesn't match. Something's missing. You need a speed up. Okay? Jesus calls it in the Course of Miracles, the great cosmic speed up. So we need to accelerate. Well, are we accelerating because we're all getting along so well? So what's going to happen is the hard way. Pole shifts, earth changes. You're going to have such a smackdown wake-up call, holy 2x4 on the head of everyone, that the world, the calamities will break people down and cause them to give up their ego. That's why the book of Revelation is explaining to us this destruction of the world and people dying and earth being devoured. It's not just trying to be like gruesome for the heck of it. It's saying that mankind will go through this, but it also is saying you personally have to have your ego dissipated for you to find Christ or the New Jerusalem, as it says in the end of Revelation. Look at what has to happen in Revelation before the New Jerusalem is born. Breakdowns, shakedowns, changes, shifts. So you and I are doing our light work. Don't be surprised if things happen through calamity, but whether they do or not, you and I are simply supposed to do our light work. Keep finding people of your tribe. Keep doing the light work. Keep doing what you can to be the change you'd like to see in the world. But do not be ashamed to call it Christ, because it's your name. When Revelation says, and this is all coming to an end, you will be given a new name, it says. It doesn't mean like, really? Because I've always liked Helen. A new name means Christ. It's not some cosmic thing. Joe becomes Sam, Sam becomes Richard. And no, you'll be given a new name. You have been going by a name already, not just your personal name, but your identity. Fallen. No matter what name I use, I'm identified with fallen, flawed. I'm a flawed, messed up human being. A new name, I am as that I am. I am the Christ. So that's the direction we're going. And as I'm going to go to a close now, understand that there's this concept like an orb we call God. Technically, there's no edge of it, but we'll just metaphorically. God. The reason you can use a circle or an orb to say God, which looks like there's something outside that orb, is because by symbolism, it is complete. Where it begins, it also ends. It's complete within itself. So that's why it's an accurate symbol for God. And it's also one. So here's this orb called God. And God created us. We're almost, you could say, like a layer that God created within itself. Here's God. A new layer of God was created called Christ. And that's us. And as Christ, to be in our highest selves, what Christ does is it sees itself as one with God. Therefore, you can't tell it apart from the original orb. Does that make sense? Perfect. The more we think we're separate, the more we start to become defined away from God. Now when you look at me, I'm this person, I'm this, I'm tall, short, fat, skinny, dark hair, light hair, all these definitions. Those are identifiables that are not our real self. So as we learn to disappear of our ego selves, we become more like God, more as the Christ that we really are. It's easily said, but as soon as I say, you know what, I'm going to start doing prayer every day that I am the Christ on earth. Father, Mother, God, you guide me in all that I think, say, and do. God will say, I am. And so it is. Great. That's the good news. The ego says, are you kidding me? Really? You want to? I'll show you. Hey, don't you back off. It's the ego is going to be like, no way. And the form that it takes is, you're saying, I want to be like God. I want to be infinitely compassionate and patient. Ego says, pilot to co-pilot, download all programs related to impatience. And here comes all your tests. This isn't God going, no. This is ourselves. The part of me that wants to remember versus the part of me that wants to stay forgotten or amnesic. And so that ego part wants to keep me out of knowing who I am. How? By giving me things, events, issues, tests that I'll fail. If I fail them, I wasn't choosing firmly enough. No to the ego, yes to my soul, my spirit, or God. That's all. It's not, the test was too big. It's impossible for us to ever have tests that we cannot pass, especially since God is with me, since God is. I can only lose belief or faith that God is, and then I might fail. I can only believe that my ego gets the best of me, then I'll fail. I can only choose to believe that my past has more power than my present, and then I fail. So it's all about choice. Choosing God that I am versus ego that I am not. The more I identify with my ego that I am not, the more that will be the prevailing voice today. Or the opposite, of course, can happen. But if I'm choosing the ego I am not, how's that going to look? Just look at your life. Everything that is not feeling like peace and joy and happiness is the test that I failed. Not the lack of God, because there can't be a lack of God. It's just, and it's not bad, it's a test that I failed. Is that bad? Should I judge myself? No. Just commit to doing better next time the exam shows up. Be advised. More patient next time. More loving. Communicative. You're going to have tests. You're going to have moments where you doubt Jesus, or you'll doubt your higher self, or you'll doubt anything. Human beings are the type that as soon as they like something, the ego is going to try to tear it down. Because it doesn't want you to be able to trust that anything good is true. No sooner do you win the lottery, the IRS is knocking at the door. Oh, that figures. You see, that's the way we live. They call it, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Always waiting. Money doesn't grow on trees kind of consciousness. But in fact, we're being told, God first, and then follow that. Let that be your guide. God. God first in all things. Let God be your guide. Start and end your day with God. This isn't like people will say you have to have a specific initiation by a group. You have to be a member of something. Christ is a consciousness. We have been members and we do attend. That's all true. But that's not what makes it Christ. It's an internal experience. So the second coming of Christ is coming. However, it's not the return of Jesus in body as much as he's now saying it's time for you to awaken. The first coming was me getting it. Second coming of Christ is you getting it. All of you. It means individually in your own ways, but it also means us collectively. Will it happen that Jesus returns? It's going to happen as follows. We have the situation we're in. We're going to have an awakening, though. Humanity is going to have a pivotal, even a really huge quantum leap forward into Christ consciousness. The easy way or the hard way? I'll be a doomsday guy and say it's mostly going to be the hard way. It doesn't have to be, but this is how humans like to be. I'm not saying that because I'm being negative. I'm saying that as a positive. Because if you can still focus on awakening Christ despite the challenges coming, you'll be more prepared. Challenge or no challenge, we're awakening Christ's self. Then that's going to be humanity shifting into what the Course in Miracles is calling the real world. We're going to actually have what the Christians called a period, a millennium of world peace. So we're going to have the world we have, which we already have. We already got through phase 1, doing that one pretty darn well. Phase 2 is we're going to go from the world of illusion and separation and duality and hate into a world of peace. So we will have that. And that'll happen relatively soon. We're going to have that. However, that's only halfway home. That's us experiencing Eden all over again. Eden. We came from heaven to Eden to earth. We're going from earth to Eden to heaven. So in our experience, we're going to shift from what we have now into an Edenic-like life for a period. Course tells you this, and the Bible tells you this. That you're going to go into a period of right-mindedness. Humanity will. Then both are telling you, Bible and Course. One calls it ego, one calls it the devil. They say after your period of right-mindedness, you'll have one more test where the ego, which in the Bible calls it Satan, will come back to the earth and tempt you to fall again. At which time you will say no. And the Course calls that the last judgment. And then home you go. And that's the New Jerusalem. Coming in, God descends. I saw a city coming from the heavens. That's where we see God descending into our being, and we're completely, transformed into oneness with God again. First, it's us talking about it. Then it's experiencing it part way. Then the decision, do you really want to own this fully? Or do you really want to go back the other direction? We will choose correctly and go home. That's the predictions. Okay? Yeah. Where we chose separation once, we will not choose it again. Yeah. So we are going home, but it isn't in the form some people think. Light ships come to the earth and take everybody to heaven. They can't go to heaven. They're only higher dimensional. They're not beyond dimensional. But there are such things. There are light beings. There are angels. There are light workers. There's all kinds. More things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in all your philosophies. All of these things are part of it. Past lives are part of it. Lifetime civilizations, ancient civilizations, aliens, all these stories are true. All these things are true. They're all part of our involution and evolution. What I care about is where the light workers are in that, and that's what I choose to be part of. So I pray this has made good sense, and that this will take you somewhere, profound. It really can. Devote to Christ consciousness. The workshop is a 4-day intensive, and we go many, many, many moons, beyond. We do this exponentially, at a deeper level. We talk about all these things I just talked about, but far more, and then far more involved. We take it into personal healing. We take it into meditations and ceremonies outside. It's very broad, but definitely it's a great statement of stepping into a commitment towards that path, Christ consciousness. So join us if you can, and thank you for attending here, and thank you for watching online. Peace be with all of you. Bye-bye.